Justin, thanks for coming over today. Let's start with a wrist check. What do you have on your wrist today?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Today I'm wearing my Brightling Top Time Corvette. So, yeah, really beautiful pop of red on the dial.
That mesh changes that watch. I love that watch, and I love it more on the mesh.
Yeah, I had only ever seen it on the leather strap all the way up until I got this watch. And when I saw it on the bracelet, I was like, wow, okay, that totally changes the watch for me, and I had to have it.
That's awesome, man. Well, I know you. We've been friends for years. You used to work at my authorized dealer here in Utah, and now you work for Brightling, which I think is awesome. Like, that's exciting. You're in the industry.
It's a super exciting change, and it's even more exciting because it's a dream position for me. With these brands, they always have a dedicated trainer that's pretty much your role is know the brand heritage, history, product lineup. And as a watch nerd, I was like absolutely in pure heaven. Like that is right up my alley.
So you actually have kind of a funny story on how you joined Brightling. Do you mind sharing that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it was regular day at the retailer I worked at, and all of a sudden, there's this gentleman that comes in. And he starts asking very vague questions at first, like, oh, are your watches all battery powered? Like really like basic stuff, right? And so he asks to see Brightling specifically, and I'm talking to him, and he's asking all the right questions for me to do all the storytelling and like get really into it. And then out of nowhere, his questions do a complete 180. And he's like, how would you compare the B01 chronograph movement to these other brands? And he lists the movements by their actual caliber numbers. And I'm like...
You're like, wait a sec. You were just talking about battery power.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on here?
So after a while, I was like, you got to tell me who you are.
Yeah.
And it ended up being the owner of the company, basically.
That's so cool.
The gentleman who had recently acquired it. So that was mind-blowing. And I was like, am I getting like punked? Like, what's happening? Where's the cameras, right? But he had asked, like, where do you see yourself in the industry? And I mentioned, down the line, I really would like to become a trainer because it's my favorite thing about what I got to do already as a sales associate is talk about the history of the product. Teach.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so now that I'm in that role, it's just like a dream come true. So
I'm excited for you, man. That's awesome.
It's been a blast, yeah.
So tell me, is there something maybe behind the scenes that us watch collectors would find interesting about your job? Like what would be something unexpected?
I would say just how tight-knit the industry is. And, if you were to ask your authorized retailer about other authorized retailers, you'd be surprised that most everybody in the industry, like let's say you've been in the industry for 5+ years, the odds that at least one person from every major retailer in the United States is pretty high because brands are taking these salespeople out to trainings, they're mingling with each other, they're meeting. It's a very amicable industry. Not to say there's not competition in some places, but it's a very tight-knit group, and so everybody kind of knows everybody. There's lots of sharing of ideas, and it's cool in that regard because it's almost like just another watch club that's just got a different side of the business, right?
What would you say, Justin, is your opinion, like where is the wider watch market going, and where do you see Brightling falling in that overall direction?
I think nowadays it's interesting. We're kind of in like another wristwatch renaissance that came about from 2020 when everybody was locked up learning about watches, collecting watches.
Right.
The interesting thing is that the consumer base now more than ever before is super knowledgeable, super well educated. It's very common that a enthusiast will come into a store knowing more than some of the salespeople in there.
Yeah.
And so what it's really doing, though, that is kind of exciting is it's really putting pressure on the industry to innovate and create something new. So if you look at like where the industry was in the 90s, you know, most brands are still relying on ETA or Valjoux calibers.
For sure.
And nowadays, you know, even Yema's doing in-house calibers.
Sure, yeah, they are.
You know, had Yema been doing something like that in the 90s, I doubt we would see a Yema in-house caliber, right? That's just one example that comes to mind. What Bremont's been doing, like all of these pushes for true manufacturing is all coming about because I think we have a very educated demographic that's shopping for watches.
Right.
And then number two is that right now, like for the younger generations that are getting into watches, there's almost like this kind of magic to it. Like take, you know, Gen Z, everything that they've ever purchased, iPads, phones, laptops, it's ephemeral. Like you buy technology, it lasts for like 3 years and then you upgrade.
Sure.
So when you have like this item that can be a generational item, it's like magic to us. And you see this with film cameras are making a big comeback. Fountain pens are making a big comeback.
I love fountain pens.
Yeah, same thing. And it's the same thing with watches where you're seeing like young guys. I remember like at when I worked at the AD, I was really worried because I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody I'm going to be selling to is going to be like a whole generation older than me, right? But there was a lot of young guys that are like my age bracket that are getting interested in watches.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool to see.
So what you said there is interesting because I totally agree watches are generational items that are different from, say, electronics. But at the same time, there is some of that, not that they get outdated, but there's progression when it comes to technology or fine-tuning the details and the aspects or, you know, the power reserve and things. And so to stay at, I guess you could say, the cutting edge while still delivering value in something that will outlive you, that's a beautiful thing, you know?
Totally. And it's like, that's one area where it's really fun to see brands compete in. And, you know, the product that we have is purely emotional, right?
Yes.
So by definition, luxury watches are non-essential items. They're something that you really buy because you want them, not because you have to have them.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, I've got the time here on my computer, on my phone. I've got wall clocks. Some of them aren't working. I need new batteries. But like, you don't need to see the time on a wristwatch, right?
Right.
It is a luxury.
But we love these items anyways, and we already were, you know, it's interesting. Harvard Business School with Gerald Zaltman did a study. And what they found was that 95 of all purchase decisions across every industry are made emotionally and only 5% are made purely logically.
That's a landslide. I didn't think it was that dramatic. I've always thought it was emotional, but that's pretty wild.
It's pretty wild, and it's like it makes sense though because you know you really convince yourself emotionally that you want or have to have something, and then the logic is what you use to justify it.
Yes.
And that's why brands are still, and it's fun because like brands are getting put so much pressure to keep innovating and pushing their specs farther because
so their emotional base can justify buying a $10,000 awesome chronograph, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like COSC, you know, +6, -4 seconds per day, the chronometer certification. You know, this is a great example because brands can just certify in-house.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
having that independent quality metric is huge because, you know, enthusiasts see that and they're like, wow, I don't have to take the manufacturer's word for it. I don't need to take the salesperson's word for it. It's been certified by somebody else. And that's why, like, you know, we wanted to, you know, just briefly touch on the B31 movement. When they debut this, like, it would not work if we just did a, you know, movement that's got like a 40-hour power reserve.
No.
And is 3 hours, like, it's not going to work.
Not at all.
No.
You get roasted if you did that.
Exactly.
And obviously Brightling didn't. The specs of the B31 are pretty impressive. I haven't seen it in person yet, but it looks really good.
It's fantastic. You know, it's super slim, 4.8 millimeters. You have a 78-hour power reserve, which is above the 70, 72 range that really is kind of becoming the de facto norm of the modern day. And then you've got a, you know, free sprung balance. So you've got variable inertia regulation.
Yes.
Like all of these things.
All the things I love.
Right.
It has it in this caliber.
It's got it. And that's the exciting thing about like having such a educated consumer base is it's really pushing watchmakers to really evolve and do things.
Yeah.
And you see that like the micro brands, probably the most competitive space in the industry, actually.
I think it is.
Like with what Christopher Ward is doing with the Bel Canto, having a striking complication at that price point is nuts.
And that's why it dominated the news cycle for so long with watch collectors, because it was unlike anything else. You can't get that for under $7,000, and that's still low too, right?
That's still a very low, yeah. Or even like the Vulcane Cricket, an alarm watch that's like basically an in-house movement again in this year 2025, like that would never happen in the 90s.
No,
that would never happen in the 90s.
What's fun is a lot of these things weren't unheard of in the 60s,
right?
And here we are in the 2020s. We're almost kind of getting back to the golden era of mechanical watches. And I almost see it, just from my perspective, with Brightling, with some of these retro-inspired watches like the Super Ocean Heritage and the Top Time and the Premier, even going back well before the 1960s. And then the Avid Timer, right, started in the 50s. So
right.
It's pretty fun. I don't know.
It's super exciting, and like things like the Datora really encapsulate this for me, because with the Datora, triple calendar chronograph, like
and a moon phase.
And a moon phase, plus moon phase, right?
My favorite Brightling. I've got to say, my favorite Brightling.
I love that watch. Yeah, I mean,
I stupidly sold it, so I got to get back to it at some point.
Well, and now we've got the B19 perpetual calendar chronograph, which, like, just looking at the market, try and find a COSC certified perpetual calendar chronograph sub $30,000, and it's really challenging. You can find perpetual calendars in that range,
right?
But perpetual plus chronograph is really an outstanding, combination of functions. And again, I think it's just indicative of, number one, where we are in the market, where consumers are looking for manufacturers that are doing these things again. We're in kind of that new wristwatch renaissance.
Right. Let me ask you this, Justin, and maybe we can end with this. You've seen both sides of the aisle. Actually, you've seen all sides of the aisle. You were a watch enthusiast first, and then you were a sales associate, and now you're with a brand, so you really have this wide perspective. Do you have any maybe funny stories from when either you were a watch collector walking into an AD for the first time, or working at an AD dealing with watch collectors, or from where you're at right now dealing with ADs? Is there something maybe comical or silly or funny or awesome that you could share in closing here?
I would just say that, like, it really is a crazy, crazy world of tons of opportunities that you would never see, that totally blindside you, right? And this is what I love about our industry is, like, it's kind of a funny story, but it also just shows you how sort of magical this industry is on the business side. Before I was brand new at the AD, we also sold jewelry. We sold a brand called Wellendorf.
Okay. And
I had expressed a lot of interest in it because they do a very creative take on gold jewelry where it's flexible. There's no...
Oh, I've seen those. Yeah, I know what those are.
Very cool. But as soon as I expressed interest, I met the rep. It's like a month later, I got a call from my manager saying, "Hey, we have a ticket for you to go to Pforzheim, Germany to meet the brand." And I'd never gone international anywhere. And I was like, what? What? And I got to meet the manufacturer. So I would say this to anybody that's watching that's like considered a career in the watch industry, especially for young guys, just try it out. There's so much opportunity here. It's a fun industry. It's not like you're never dealing with the end of the world, right? You're helping people celebrate moments. And so it's kind of why I decided to stick around in the industry. It's just like a fun place to be.
Yeah.
So, I hope that's a fun enough story, but...
And we know, oh no, totally. We know watch collectors will always love watches. So
yes,
you can be in this industry as long as you want and have as much fun as you want, because it's not going anywhere. And it'll always be exciting. It'll always be a generational aspect to these watches, but they'll continue to be improved and evolved over the decades. And again, a very beautiful thing. So
totally couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for coming over, Justin. It was fun to chat with you. I wish you luck in your career with Brightling, and hopefully we can sit down and do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always happy to talk watches.